Okay, welcome back. We are now going to talk about the more operational end. I was going to say functional, but it's not really functional. It's the operational end of strategic planning. And much of what goes on in that set of slides I gave you is based on a workshop that I attended a few years ago, but I see it is still on the website for the Middle States Association of Colleges and Schools Higher Education Council, HEC. So it's MSA-HEC. That is the outfit that accredits all of higher education in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Maryland. That is the Middle States. Okay, why is it important? Frankly, because it is a peer review. You're not going to be evaluated by people who don't know what you do. These are people who are doing, in their own context, things very similar to you. But it is external. They are going to see things differently than you do. The old Shakespearean cliche out of Macbeth was you are so intimately acquainted with each tree that you can't see the forest. And that's what happens when you're on a campus. The longer you are there on that campus, or subset, however that may be run, the way the schools are organized, the less you are going to see of the big picture. But that's why you must be familiar, as printed on the website at Middle States, is the characteristics of excellence. They're in the neighborhood of 15 or 16 of them. You ought to look at all of them. Not all of them will apply directly to you, but you should look at them, be familiar with them, and see how it is going to be possible for you to learn from them. You heard me, I've written to some of you in your papers when we talk about the problem that emerges when you're talking about what bureaucracies do. They build silos. Now that's become a bit of a cliche, but it remains true. Within institutions, you have student success, instruction, both credit and non-credit, and they're both separate. You have finance, you have facilities, number of human resources. All those things can become, just think back to, if you were in the Midwest, I grew up with these huge grain silos. They might be 20 stories high, but there's no crosswalks between them. And that in and of itself creates a serious problem, because if people keep just climbing up that silo and never knowing what's going on, that might save them time in the silo next door. So you have to think about that. One of the things that is advised by Middle States is that you need to have the final characteristics of how you put your institution together. It needs to be systematic and systemic. Systematic means that there's a rationale and a logic that someone externally can see and understand. Systemic, everything's included. It's mission-driven. Talked about the importance of mission in the preceding YouTube, but mission should drive what we do. We constantly are seeking new data inputs. We analyze it, we evaluate it, and we decide, does it fit our mission or doesn't it? Another one that should come out of this, in fact, this could not have come at a better time, because at the moment, if my memory serves, talked to several of you about other courses you're taking. Some of you have just finished. Some of you are enrolled now in the budget and finance course. That is important, because one of the things that's systemic, mission-driven, analytical, and evaluative of information that's incoming, all of that is tied to resource allocation. And you got two things you have to be dealing with in your plan. The first is very carefully predicting from a system standpoint, what funding are you going to get? For example, the Maryland legislature just quit this week. They're now talking about how much money is coming. The community college that I left has been growing, slowly but growing. But right now, because the governor has tightened down the budget, they're going to get less system money than they got last year. So, one of the things I've said before, though I don't care for that president particularly, he is a fine fundraiser. They just finished a very, very large fundraising activity. In one evening, $65,000 was raised. A lot of money. It tends to fatten things up. They have a foundation that raises money on a regular basis. They look for collaboration with other agencies in the community. It's one of the oldest most trite sayings you'll ever hear. One hand washes the other. I've talked to people about this now till I'm literally blue in the face. We just have forgotten how important that is. That got us through the Carter recessions, the Reagan recessions. Both Bushes had recessions. Clinton had a piece of one. And as you now know, Mr. Trump is trying to avoid being in one, though the stock market over the last several days it went very high when he started. Then a lot of craziness went on. He started a plateau. And there's a great deal of pressure out on how are they going to control the budget. Big discussion on TV about that today. Okay, that's another part of the structure. Now let's look at the other piece of the organization of the strategic plan. First of all, a committee of the whole, which is something I'm sure you learned about if you had a Robert's Rules of Order course or if you had a political science course that dealt with organizations. You're familiar that a committee of the whole is fine. And it's very small communities in New England. They still run small communities that way. But for a college of any size, you're going to have a steering committee. One of the critical things you need to do with that steering committee is to be very sure that every role assigned to that committee is implemented, is personalized by someone who is very clear about what her or his responsibilities are to be. Another one of the things you need to develop in your institutional research office, and again, many community colleges do what they have to do, but only what they have to do. I have been blessed. At the last school where I was, we had 3. They're on their 3rd one since I was involved with them back in '72. They have had 3 extraordinarily people who do institutional research, and they are constantly looking at the internal environment. They're surveying subsets of student populations, subsets of faculty, subsets of maintenance personnel, all sorts of subsets that have an important issue. And if you understand where they are, it's much easier to make them a part of your internal stakeholder cadre. That's very critical. Another thing that comes along that you need to be aware of that I think is critical is you've got to constantly have your fingers on the pulse of what is going on in those governmental bodies that you rely on for support. And Morgan, they have an office throughout this legislature. They have an office with a director and anywhere from 4 to a dozen, depending on what's going on at a given point in time, in Annapolis. Now, most community colleges don't have that. They don't need that much presence in Annapolis, but they will work 5 or 6 of them together with a person who will be a lobbyist for them. And that in and of itself is important. On the other hand, we have someone, usually it's in the president's office, either the president, him or herself, or it can actually be the president's chief assistant, will spend a lot of time, a great deal of time, working with the chief fiscal officer and the county manager, as well as the county, whatever they call them. In Washington County, they're called the commission. In Howard County, for example, they're called the county council. Don't know what they're called in some of the others, but that's enough of an example. Okay, now let's talk about some other things with the little bit of time I have left. I want to talk about certain things that need to go on a regular basis in a planning management model. And this is where that strategic management comes in. The people, not person. The president has his or her leadership team. And then they assign from that management responsibilities to aspects of it. So what are your key structures? Do you know what they are? Are you carefully communicating with, on a regular basis, the individual who is in charge of each of those areas? How close are you to your fiscal officer? Revenues and expenditures in your area of the college are constantly part of the plan. Every area has input to that. There's a process when the budget is built, and then there's outcomes and the accountability piece, so don't forget about that either. The other thing, yield. You spend an awful lot of time recruiting students, and what is the yield out of your hard work? Let's talk about another one that I think is very, very critical, and that is both in terms of full-time and part-time employees and students. What is your ratio? Most community colleges today, the ratio between full-time and part-time faculty is way out of balance, way too many part-time. You need a certain percentage. I'll get into that more with you before the course is over. And remember what the thing about part-time students, they still require a large number of the same services full-time do. So don't cut them off. Okay, that gets you pretty much now. We're coming down to the home stretch of the last two modules, and I think you'll have a great deal of fun as you pull all of this together.